Thornhill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to give a shout out also to my colleague from Lethbridge for fighting the heavy hand of big, bossy government that's struck again with this bill. And it's almost become a cliche. And its latest offender is this bill, C-18. And it's sad to see the Liberal response to an important and relevant modern issue concerning the place where bureaucracies, news providers, digital technology intersect. We're here to debate a bill that fixes one problem instead of the other that actually needs it, that proposes solutions that won't work, that's backed by a minister who has yet to accomplish an actual win during his tenure. In other words, it's business as usual from this minister and this government. The incompetence is often confused with malice, and I can assure you, Madam Speaker, that I think it can be both. On the surface, C-18 seems like a pretty innocent bill. The gist, small independent news providers should have a chance to compete with the big fish and earn their fair share of revenue in a free market. Fair enough as a concept, but when we dig deeper, we find that this piece of legislation is deeply flawed and it doesn't accomplish the stated goal. Over the past 8 years, we've witnessed an unprecedented erosion of freedoms under the Liberal government, particularly C-11, the censorship bill, as just one example. And it was amongst the worst bills ever brought to this House, with an alarming opposition from industry, experts, creators, and even their own friends, and not just once, twice, thanks to the Member of Parliament from Lethbridge, who's not allowed to speak. During those 8 same years, we've also seen an alarming growth in the size and the power of the federal government here in Ottawa, with new abilities to regulate, to give and to take away, to pick winners and losers, to define right and wrong. Madam Speaker, a government that is big enough to do anything or to be anything is the same government that's big enough to take anything away or everything away. And the overbearing approach, wedded with incompetence, adds icing to the cake of failure, this Liberal failure. Because there are no longer proper safeguards in the new powers that the government has given itself, there is no justification on any of the decisions. Some of the most senior ministers don't read emails. Others aren't briefed. Some simply are placeholders in organizations where it seems like nobody's in charge. There is no accountability, and Bill C-18 is the epitome of this. It's big government, it's limited freedom, and it's crippling incompetence, all combined into one bill. You see, the political calculation here was that they might be able to force Google or Facebook to pay for links and to pay their fair share, saying at times it would be upwards of 30% of the cost for every news outlet that would be covered by these two companies. But when you dig into the bill, we see the opposite is actually true, because the publishers post links themselves to increase traffic and get more revenue. We heard that over and over at committee. So it never made much sense to begin with, but when we found out from Facebook that news is only 3% of their overall feeds, it now makes even less sense. But beyond the minister's initial miscalculation, he has no answers to how he'll deal with Canadians overall getting less news as a result of this bill. Unless, of course, he's going to stop all of the government advertising, or even more ludicrous, they're going to stop Liberal Party advertising, let's say, during a campaign. Of course he's not going to do that. Even if he was threatening to do that, it's a completely empty threat. It's more empty rhetoric and bluster, and empty rhetoric and bluster that Canadians will end up paying for. So let's go piece by piece and break it down. My first point is big government. Here in C-18, the CRTC is back center stage, much like with the censorship bill. C-18 gives this unelected, unaccountable body of bureaucrats sweeping new powers. It would be responsible for ensuring that big social media companies like Facebook and Google reach licensing agreements with various new outlets. And if an agreement can't be reached, it would have the power to step in and appoint a mediator and then an arbitrator to do the job, giving the government the power to pick the winners and losers in a free market. Who wouldn't benefit for these deals? Well, it's not going to be small and local independent organizations that actually need our help. Rather, it's going to be large, established groups who can afford the high-priced lawyers and who can curry favor with the CRTC and, by extension, this government. In fact, many outlets like the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, Le Devoir, and more have already reached deals. So these big media groups might have the ability to negotiate with Facebook or even the federal government, but small mom and pop shops certainly find themselves in a very different position. And we got confirmation of that already. Lobbying records show that there was one meeting about C-18 every 4 days for the span of 8 months. And we got confirmation from the parliamentary budget officer, too. He said that 75% of the money in this bill will go to CBC and Rogers and Bell, leaving only 25% left for everybody else. Precisely the opposite of the result one would want. My second point, limited freedom, forcing companies to pay for news access by mandating agreements in the free market. There would be less news, there would be less choice, there would be less independence. We've already seen the effects of that as Facebook recently shut down news hosting services for some Canadians as a result of this legislation. That's a preview of what's to come, and it was the most obvious thing that was going to happen. And if Google decides to do the same, it would again hurt the small independent producers. Large outlets like the CBC or CTV or the Toronto Star wouldn't be affected. You can hardly say the same about the thousands of other independent broadcasters in Canada. The Heritage Minister can say that this was not the intention, but the outcomes remain the same. Which brings me to my third point, and that's incompetence. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, I should say, I'll be frank, only in this government could a Heritage Minister do no consultation, ignore voices opposing this, not one, but two of his laws, and fail so spectacularly without consequences. His record leaves much to be desired of anyone who looks critically at the issues and wants to do anything to solve them, in this House or in committee or in the Senate. In front of committee only a few weeks ago, the Heritage Minister couldn't answer basic questions about the legislation. From that bewildering appearance, he seems to believe that the internet is the problem, which is why he wants to regulate it with C-11 and tax it with C-18. He doesn't realize that the great equalizer, the internet, is the place where all voices are heard, where people big and small can spread their ideas. It's the very outcome he wants to achieve. The bill threatens that. And beyond his crusade, this bill is extremely vague and unclear, and it removes the certainties and the safeguards that anyone looking to Canada relies on. The minister likes to claim that he's working for the little guy, but that he won't let Canadians get quote-unquote bullied by media giants. But that exactly the opposite again is happening. He's not working for the little guy. He's working in no way to rectify an issue. He's working to make the government, the CRTC, big media groups even more powerful and less accountable. You can't possibly be for big government, higher taxes, bigger bureaucracy, and for the little guy. You can't have it all of the ways. If it truly helps independent media, then why on earth would organizations keep speaking against their own interests? And we've heard this debate all day long. They wouldn't. Here's what they do say. Philip Crawley of the Globe called C-18 a, quote, threat to the independence of media. Canada Land's Jesse Brown, no friend of the Conservatives, underlined the risks that C-18 poses to Canadians' trust in news providers. Witnesses at a recent Senate committee admitted that this bill would devastate internet traffic and that the media groups actually rely on. Canada's Conservatives believe that Canadian news media should be fairly compensated for the use of their content by platforms like Google and Facebook. But the Liberals' approach to this issue through Bill C-18 is absolutely devastating, not only because it won't work, but it also creates a problem we didn't have before. Madam Speaker, Conservatives have listened to this feedback. We tried to implement amendments to level the playing field at the CRTC, to ensure journalistic independence, to target aid to the smallest, most deserving broadcasters, the person starting their Substack out of their own home. But at every step of the way, we were voted down. This bill should be called the No Online News Act instead of the Online News Act. That's what it will do in practice. And I will proudly vote against this bill. I will vote on the side of the actual independent media, which will be killed at the expense of a government, again, protecting their friends in legacy media.